think it got mailed.
No, it was just something that I
Yes, yeah.
whipped up.
Alright, you guys are all set, so no other attendees yet, but,
I'll watch.
okay, you all, you want me to hang
I'll
out?
watch until you come back with the.
Alright, sounds good.
We're recording?
Yes.
Okay, MJ.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. So we are still expecting, that Louise will be coming to join us. This particular item, this bylaw and charter review working group, it came out of a select board goal that we put in place this year. And I want to talk about the genesis for it because it's something that I've been talking about for a year or two, maybe now at this point. And the last formal review really of our charter and bylaws occurred at the point where we instituted town manager form of government. Believe it or not, that's like 20 years ago.
It
So
is
it's a
20.
long time. And, I know none of us are any older than we were then, but that's when it was. So, and what we found, it was very interesting last year. We made a change, as you recall, last year, to the personnel board. We've made other changes, okay? Yes, Teddy?
And it has not been approved. The home rule petition to change the charter has not been approved.
Has not
So
been
we
approved.
can't post the new bylaws.
Okay, but what happened when we brought it up as a topic was it seemed fraught. The idea was, well, why would you be going in and looking at anything in the charter? So part of the idea behind this was sort of to de-escalate that process, to say there are actually very good reasons for reviewing these documents on a regular basis and looking at them to see if they match the times and the process and the practices that are in place, and for putting some eyes on them. So it was with the hope that we could think about what such a process would look like, what a frequency that was appropriate might be on. I mean, I can tell you for my board, the answer is, we do a general review of our bylaws every 10 years. They've been changed actually 3 times over the last 10 years, but there's a general review that's called for. I do a general review of charter every 3 years, for committees, just so people are thinking about how, what they're supposed to be doing relates to the work that they're actually doing and to the practices that they have. So it's just good governance, frankly. But within that, we could look at frequency, we can look at who would be the group that might convene for doing that. We can talk about whether we should do it. So all of that is on the table. I'm thankful to Kate for putting together sort of this decision-making tree. Our goal, hopefully, if we decide that this is something that we would do, is that we meet tonight. We maybe meet tonight or one other night, but that we could come to some consensus fairly quickly about what we might want to bring to town meeting.
Thank you. Great job.
We have everybody here, right? So we can take we still need to record it.
Yeah.
Okay.
People might come watch.
I'm not in the attendee list?
You can stay there.
Okay. Alright, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kate, I didn't bring the charge with me,
Oh,
and I don't think that will be what we sent out either.
I think it's in the
Yeah, it
memo.
was in the-
It's in the memo.
It's in the memo.
Does anyone else need, the meeting outline?
No, the memo would be, because I probably have it online.
The memo is here.
Thank you.
Right.
I think the charge is in charge. We'll take the memo. I'm sure. I think I will. It's not in mine.
Yeah. it's not in-
It's not, no, it's not in what I printed, so. Do we have enough? I don't think it's there.
Establish a process to do, okay, yeah,
Okay,
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
it's not the charge, yeah, that we sent out formally. But you're right, I think the charge was fairly simple.
I can pull it up, it's online.
So this was the goal that we had. We put together, who the working group would be, what the charge to this group would be. Really for determining whether we would go forward and what the process might look like, process and frequency.
I mean, basically the charter, the charge of the group. Yes, thank you. I printed it. It's sitting on my table. Review the town bylaw and charter review procedures in other communities. Develop recommendations relative to the process by which such a review should be conducted in Needham. draft a home rule petition for inclusion in the 2024 annual town meeting warrant. That essentially base this, outline in terms of the decisions that might need to be made, and then, town council, they can draft it.
Okay, so I think there's sort of a threshold question, which is there somebody who believes that we shouldn't consider a regular review of our bylaws and charter on some periodicity?
I think it's good governance to do it, and I would think that review of the bylaw is probably a more frequent thing than a review of the charter. That was my thought walking into this.
Yeah, I had some questions. At the moment, what is the current mechanism for a charter change? So outside of this, that we need to do it at certain intervals, what is the current mechanism?
There's no review, it comes up ad hoc, so whenever there's a charter change that's required, town meeting, has to approve a home rule petition, and then it goes to the legislature for the House, and then the Senate, and then the governor. So the one we did last May for the personnel board.
Special, I think.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
still in
it's still-
process. Which
it's
is
in
not
the Senate.
atypical, but
It's in the
that,
Senate.
that would be the process. So the outcome of a charter review would be a home rule petition that has to go to town meeting, and then it would go to the state.
Right, but I guess my question is sort of the impetus for that, right? Like, so something came up that required a change as opposed to just, and so typically that's always how it's been done, something that comes out of committee or out of a goal.
Typically, it's been something that people have recognized really needed a change, and so it came forward for that reason.
In this one particular incident that they're talking about, the general bylaw was amended to change the name from personnel board to human resource. That also required a charter change, so there was a home rule petition that is sitting somewhere. I've never seen it take so long.
But that's all it was, though. It wasn't a substantive.
It clarified some language, really, but
So here's kind of how I think about it. I agree with Adam with respect to bylaws. Like, I think they're kind of two separate questions, and bylaws probably should be looked at more regularly, especially since we do change bylaws from time to time at town meeting. And so it's always good to go back and see, we had a certain number of changes, we need to make sure that everything lines up. And I'm just thinking of the last one where it had been such a long time since we had done any cleanup on fines and on penalties, that was a lot of work, and so that kind of thing. I think charter, where it involves your government, I think is something that maybe we should, consider and talk about a little bit more in depth in this group. Just in terms of what we do here. Because it really is, how often do we change charters? Not very. And we shouldn't be doing it willy.
I don't think there's
Really,
any
right?
expectation that the group has to make changes. Okay, we certainly have reviews where you say, that's good, we reaffirm it.
But I think okay, I agree, but I think also that you don't want to set the expectation.
I would
Okay.
be in agreement with that.
Yeah.
It just creates an opportunity for holistic review to say, where are you?
One of the things that I noticed in rereading some of the stuff that was sent out is, one way we can think about it is, what are the parameters of what that group looks at? Because I think that one of the suggestions, and I don't want to get us off topic here, but I think there are ways to limit it. So that it doesn't appear to be, every X number of years, we're looking at radically changing things that, there was some mention of things that might be obsolete, or things that might be internally inconsistent, or, we can think about that as one avenue.
Okay. I think I'm hearing that there's some agreement, certainly for bylaws. And there could also be agreement on the charter if it was understood that you didn't go into the charter looking for wholesale changes. And I don't think that's what's actually being proposed by anybody. It's just to say there's a conscious review at some point in time.
Process.
A process.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we go forward, then I think it's probably worthwhile taking a look at, some of the bylaw and charter review procedures from other communities that Kate sent out to us to give us some idea of what other people were doing. I know when we started down this path, one of our questions was, are there other communities that do this? And so I suppose it's really no surprise that many other communities have been doing this, longer than we have. It would seem to be a reasonable thing to do. Do people have any thoughts or anything that particularly stood out to them about making these reviews?
It looked like there was, 5 years and 10 years seemed to be the review frequency. And, of the towns, there was a question of the appointing authority, either a select board moderator or, more decentralized with school committee, finance committee, town clerk, planning, would participate as part of the review committee. I think 10 years and 5 years, I think were the most frequent, or the most common. And I think charter for 10 and bylaws in 5 years was the common approach, if I remember correctly, and it looked like it was predominantly select board and maybe one other, local body that would be appointing authorities. We have a spreadsheet, I think, that details each town obviously has its own way, but that seems to be the common.
So I think each town does have its own character. I mean, Needham traditionally is a town that thinks about multiple appointing authorities to different committees. To me, that probably makes sense for this, so we can talk about that, but I just feel like that's kind of our culture, is that different bodies in town that have a significant view on something, like the people who are at the table here, do tend to participate in these types of things.
I have a question about the towns and cities. Are these typically the towns and cities we look at when we do any sort of here? We look out when we do other projects and activities that we compare to these particular towns? How are they selected?
They were selected by, wide net that I sent out who went.
Oh, okay.
I would not say they're peer communities, but we've tried. There are some,
I guess that was my question.
there are some peers in here.
But it looks like the ones that you highlighted in more detail represent different models for us to consider.
That's what, yeah, last year.
So
Not comprehensive.
I have a pretty strong opinion that I don't think it should be by policy. That if we are going to set up some type of review, it should be codified in the bylaws and or the charter. So,
I think that was,
yeah,
Right.
but like there were a number of these that had just, they have policies, like I don't think,
Yeah, no, I think we're looking to bring something that can go to town meeting that becomes a part of. I generally think a bylaw is more flexibly changed than a charter, so I might encourage it to be there. That we have more control over that, but I do think it should be codified. Agree completely.
and then the second thing is bylaws and charter are basically the laws of the town. And so like the charter is like our mini constitution, this is how our government is, and then the bylaws are, here are all the laws by which we operate. So I think that when a body is set up to review the bylaws and the charter, it has to represent fairly the legislative branch, as well as those branches of government, the executive branch that is governed by the law. So I think one of the things, we have to achieve some kind of balance there. And I think the appointing authorities also have to be balanced that way. Is that, Those are things that goes fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Other than that.
I would agree. Thinking this through, that is where I got a little bit stuck as to making sure that it is fair and balanced and there aren't necessarily agendas coming to the table. Because the charter, I mean, this makes me a little nervous, might be the wrong word, but bylaws, I totally get the review. The charter, I feel like that's the document, right? So I want to be cautious proceeding through this.
Okay. And, do we feel that both charter and bylaws, which, and I heard what Adam said about, bylaws maybe being every 5 years, I think workload wise, I'm gonna say there's a sense that maybe we consider starting with the bylaws because they're easier in that sense. But that we consider a structure that might be bylaws on the 5s and charter on the OOs. But not to do both bylaws and charter in a, to put it every 5 years. I just think that's a huge lift for the town, depending on who's in the working group, so.
So, but there could be a decision, not like, charter review is due in year, whatever, 2030. There could be a decision, there's no need to do a charter review this year.
I think the group could convene and decide that at their first meeting. I think that's possible. Yeah,
In other words, the review committee convenes and then discusses it and resolves in that meeting that they're not gonna make a recommendation for modifying the charter. And that could also be true for the meeting of the bylaws.
Although,
it's
probably
all
highly unlikely.
Of the bylaws.
Yeah, of the bylaws, highly unlikely.
Right. But
I mean, I think part of what happens with bylaws, right, is we make changes to
Right.
bylaws over time. So the idea of having a holistic view that says, what did we disrupt as we were doing these little things is part of what happens with bylaws.
would you see it as one, do we see it as one committee to conduct both reviews? Or separate committees to do separate reviews that have separate appointing authorities?
That's one of your questions.
Right,
I do think that's one of the questions. I think I heard definitely that there is a desire that the group be balanced between executive and legislative branches, which means more appointees from town meeting, from the legislative branch, by the moderator. Certainly for the charter, I guess that's a question for the group. Do we also think that's needed for the bylaws, or could the bylaws be a smaller group, right? Given for every group, right, there's the challenges in how you optimize decision-making and coordinating the schedule, all those factors that go into coordinating. So,
personally, I think, I like the approach of a broader committee for the charter review. That's intentionally, has a built-in mix of representation. And for the bylaw review, I'm not as convinced that we would necessarily need as large of a committee, nor, and I'm certainly open to a representative from, through the town moderator, but I wouldn't think that it would necessarily have to have multiple appointees from the moderator's office for the bylaw review.
I also want to observe, right, if these are 5 years apart, well, it's valuable to have somebody who's been through the process before. I think it's unlikely that everybody would be the
Right.
same from one to review to the next.
Right.
So I just observe that as we're thinking about.
So that brings in my question, is there some sort of expert that goes along with this committee, such as a consultant or outside counsel, somebody that is helping to facilitate?
Well, so
That's my
I
question,
would-
whether it's town council or an outside, I think,
I
just
would
thinking of
hope
the composition.
that between town council, the town manager and our town clerk, that they are the institutional memory threads that go through there.
But is there some need for
And
an
outside,
outside consultant? Like, let's say the first set of bylaw reviews is to conform them. I mean, that's like, that could require, it will require
So I don't know that you require a consultant. Again, I think it depends on what the group decides the scope of work is. And then I think there's gonna need to be a decision, does that?
And I guess I'd say that for bylaw review, we can certainly handle bylaw review. I would say the same is true of the charter review as well. I think the only possible exception that I could think of is if you were looking to do a real wholesale redo of your charter and build everything,
Back.
differently from the ground back up. Because that would be, that would be a very labor intensive exercise, which we could do. But that's the only scenario I can really think where you would really want to think about bringing in an outside consultant. Bylaw and sort of bylaw review and routine charter amendment, I think would not rise to that level. I wouldn't think, but
The only,
that's obviously.
the only thing I would think of, Teddy, is some communities use like, I don't know, like general code or something where they recodified the bylaws.
Recodified, yes.
So that would
Yeah,
probably open outside. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but.
Well, we did it not, I'm trying to think how long ago there was a recodification. And we didn't have general code do it.
Yeah. But if you were to do
It
one,
was a committee that got together and.
Well, it sounds like in general, unless there's a whole scale, we probably don't need to sort of assume an outside counsel, but could engage if needed, could engage with them.
And just back to the E-code question and recodifying, we've worked with multiple towns through that process. And I think it's a expensive, labor intensive exercise that is of questionable utility, going forward.
I don't know if it helps, but, every amendment to the general bylaw has to go to the Attorney General for approval after town meeting. And, they're pretty strict in reviewing their, materials.
And that also means we have records of all those, so if we have to go back to figure out, by the way, when did this happen, we're able to
Yes,
do
we do
that.
have records of those.
Yes, we do. Oh, that's where I'm thinking, right? The town clerk's role is one of those key threads. to the work of them.
so then what exactly is the committee that would be charged with reviewing the bylaw or the charter? What are they charged to review for? What are they looking for?
I think they're really sitting there looking at, first of all, particularly in bylaws, right? Are there discrepancies that have
Right.
gotten introduced? That's clear.
Or are there
I
old
think-
bylaws that we haven't? looked
Are
at?
there things that we haven't looked at, that somebody would flag that made sense 10 years ago, but doesn't make sense today? And I think those anachronisms creep in over time. So I really think it's matters of that, and I suspect that we may find that there are matters of practice where we may find that somebody may have forgotten what the bylaw says. That happens on occasion. And, it's worth being sure that it says what you think it says and that you are following that law.
Okay,
Okay. I also think one of the things you find in bylaws is it's possible, again, anachronisms, right? That somebody will look at it and say, gosh, XYZ is not covered in our bylaws. Should this be on somebody's work plan? In which case it gets identified as something going forward. So those are the things that I think about looking at bylaws.
do we know how other communities have used their committees? Their bylaw review committees? What has come out of them?
The ones that people I've talked to is that, it's a 10-year process, so the committee might meet and, if you look at, for instance, the sections of the bylaw, you might have a committee that says, this year we're gonna talk about, general wetlands or stormwater or sign bylaw, and they bring those groups in and talking about whether their bylaws still reflects what they need. I think it's important also to note, I didn't think I put in the document, I don't think these committees would preclude changes that come up that are needed.
Right.
But
I don't think so.
But
either.
if they were just sort of ideas, you might be able to say, well, why don't you wait for the next time? If they were immediately needed, I think they would still happen. But, so I know that, colleagues of mine, they have committees and they go in and they talk to them about, how the capital budget process is put forward, and they talk to the committee, and the committee says, well, that sounds fine. And that's it. So I mean, that's the kind of thing. You could have a committee that just decides to do some of it in a given period.
So I guess one of my thoughts, having recently worked on the stormwater bylaws, right? a committee was put together very specifically for the stormwater
Mhm.
and to come up with recommendations.
Mhm.
Now, so what would be the interplay with this committee? So that was the board, the select board, right? You said we need stormwater bylaws.
We don't have any other way to affect that, right?
Well, you
So-
needed, right, you needed it.
Yeah.
So,
So it
A
gets put in
committee,
place.
right.
So I
I don't know that we were a
As-
committee, we were a working
Well,
group.
there's a now, there's a new committee.
And, right, but like there had to be, like, there would have to be an initiation first, and then you got to the next step. So now you've got a stormwater bylaw,
Mhm.
and this committee says, you know what, we think this should be looked at again.
So I think that's where you decide if the committee can resolve something or if it needs to get put on a work plan.
What if that's not
Great.
something that the select board thinks needs to be looked at?
I think if it comes out of one of these committees, it gets put on a work plan.
I could see a scenario, one of the things that struck out with me is the stormwater management, is a stormwater bylaw, because the planning board has received a number of complaints stemming from development and affecting a neighboring property. And I understand that the town on its own is aware of the problem through other government departments and has been struck up a new committee. And so that on an ad hoc basis, a new recommendation and an improvement in the bylaw may be made. If that hasn't happened, or if there's a lesser issue that could be, lesser item that could be improved in the stormwater bylaw, it seems to me like that would just happen as part of the routine review of the bylaws, and a list is developed. If it's a concert, if it's something that's, has a higher level of urgency, it is on a work plan already within the government agencies.
Right, but so I guess I'm trying to understand what this particular bylaw review committee would do. So now we know there's an issue with the stormwater bylaw. Okay, and the planning board has flagged it, and maybe some other, the building commissioner, maybe the select board already had it on their list. So now what happens? Is it this committee that then sits down and reviews the bylaw? Is there some other working group, like I'm not following.
So I think
what
we need to think about
happens.
what the timing is, but it strikes me that this committee, in a year that you
Mhm.
know is taking up a bylaw review,
Mhm.
right? Will start early in the year, because your target is town meeting. If the group decides that there's something that needs to be on a work plan, they need to surface it early in the year, so that makes to the work plan. This committee is not intended to have the
No, not this,
expertise,
right,
right?
or
So
the
it
committee that
needs
is
to
set up
go
will not be,
to
okay.
somebody else who can bring it back as input once it gets flagged.
Okay, so that's,
From
I guess that was my question, where there was a stormwater working group that was set up
Yeah.
to then write a recommendation back
Yeah,
regarding,
Yes.
based upon the questions that were asked, here are the recommendations.
yes.
Okay, and so this would not be this particular group.
Right.
Okay,
I think this group just helps to flag if there's something that hasn't made it to a work plan, what needs to get there.
This committee has hearings and people come in and say, we want you to look at this,
right,
then that's something that the
Right.
committee could.
That was my question, the public process of it. So can you just say again or elaborate what you're saying? So the vision is that the next group has open public hearings.
Oh, yeah. Yes, they would be public, they would always be public, and then
Sure,
I assume,
I meant,
but also they would be
hearing
secret.
from the.
Yes, as I imagine this committee going forward, it would be to surface the things that wouldn't get surfaced otherwise. Like the stormwater, that's big on everybody's mind, but something that is internally inconsistent or something that's been sitting there and nobody's looked at it and it's like 50 years old and it's obsolete. Like those kinds of things, the things that are top of mind will bubble
Something
up
to look at.
anyway, and are not, this process doesn't have to stop those things, there's an urgent need, that's
Right, right.
that's gonna go
Yeah.
forward anyway. This is more the forgotten little dusty corners.
Okay, so I'm just sort of thinking through what we were just saying, and I understand that discrepancies, things that are obsolete, things like that, but if public can come in and make comments. Is this just another way, another avenue for bylaw changes coming to this committee as opposed to some of the other boards and committees that we normally do when we come to town meeting? Is this another avenue? Am I misunderstanding that?
I
Because
thought,
if the public can come in and suggest something, what would their, I mean, I have to think of a particular example that I can't off the top of my head, but there are other avenues now where the boards and the committees, they're doing that and bringing things to town meeting.
They often come in the form of citizens petitions, which are always the, you know, maybe having somebody bring their idea to a committee that could think about it and make recommendations on it, might be useful.
I would think that there's a scenario where the bylaw committee, let's say, that's struck up, you know, convenes, they have a focus, there may be one thing they want to look at a stormwater bylaw, or they want to look at, or they may want to look at another item in the bylaw in particular and hold a hearing on that particular section. Maybe it's something to do with licensing and permitting, and holds a hearing on licensing and permitting. And to your point, someone from the public may want to participate in a hearing on that. But I think the committee itself would strike up its own agenda and form its own review based on a threshold that would be prescribed. And like Mary Ann said at the outset, there'd be a scenario where they may review these and resolve that there's no further action. But to the extent that someone wanted to review or make a modification to the sign bylaw or to the wetlands or stormwater, these other items, that a hearing is held on that subject matter. And the public would participate at that particular hearing on that subject matter. That's how I foresaw.
So I think we would need to figure out, depending on what came forward, whether it's something that this committee would need to have a hearing on, or whether it needs to get referred, right? Part of what I find is that when you invite public participation, somebody who may have had the ability to go all along to a committee decides that they're gonna show up on this occasion of public participation. So I do think you never know exactly what's going to come. And I think the committee will have to make some judgment calls about, is it something that gets referred, or is it something that the committee takes up? But I absolutely think that starting with public participation and feedback from the public is a good place to start, and we will be surprised what people come with.
But I think that there has to be, as you and Adam both said, there has to be some threshold that is met. So someone can't just, you know, they want a particular bylaw change because they want that bylaw change. Like, what is the problem
Mhm.
that we are trying to solve by changing the bylaw?
Right.
Because we can't have, I mean, some of these are process bylaws.
Correct,
We can't have processes in the town changing
correct.
from, you know, one to another, then back, or if something is working well. And maybe it could be tweaked, but we don't know what the effect of the tweak would be. You know, we may want to not do that unless it's very clear what the problem is.
So I
Not sure how
absolutely think we will engage staff if that's what needed. I mean, the committee is gonna have to work with other organizations in town if they take something up or have a question about it. You're completely right, Louise.
And the other thing is, looking at the list of our bylaws, who does it then get referred to?
What was that? I didn't hear that last time.
Who does it then get referred to? You know, what if someone has something on the future school needs committee? I did not read that bylaw, so I don't have it off the top of my head. But, you know, we just think it should, something different should be.
So where I've seen happen is that they bring in the people who are on the future school needs, or bring in the school committee or the school department who have a role. And then this committee makes a recommendation. I mean, that is the point, is that there'd be this other committee making a recommendation. That doesn't necessarily mean town meeting will approve it either.
Right, right. I just don't want to see us fixing things that don't need to be fixed, just because somebody has a different idea of how it should be.
Yeah, I think,
I'll just say that's, at least it seems to me, in my simplistic way of thinking about it, the reason for the committee is that these things can be considered, because you're right, you don't want to change everything that someone thinks needs to be changed. That's the Facebook way. I don't
Right.
want that.
right.
Right.
So,
I was gonna say, certainly my real life experience is not that that is what happened, that
Right.
people come and determine, is it a real problem or not, do we need to focus or not? And I think that's the benefit of a multi-constituent committee is
Right,
you
yeah.
are able to consider, is it a real problem?
Because there are other avenues for a lot of these. And I guess when I was first looking at this, I was seeing this more as clerical and administrative issues, things that might be redundant or contradict each other. So you know,
That is the biggest.
that is the biggest, but there's a lot of meat in there and just, again, I'm feeling I proceed cautiously on some of this. Could be big changes,
And we
could
don't
be
want,
conversations.
and you don't want them to, governed by Facebook by mob rule. Right, but that's, I think, the purpose of the committee, is
Right.
that it has its
That's what I
own
think.
authority to, through a discussion of that group, resolve whether that one issue that's been frustrating that particular resident, whether that gives rise to, action by the board would resolve that. If it's something that needs to study and determine the urgency of it, or whether it needs to be referred out to another committee or a work plan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my imagining, I didn't imagine this committee to be like a general complaint box. Right, you know what I mean, which is, I think, what your fear is, you know, so there might be ways to structure it so that it was not that. You know, because it doesn't make any sense, because there are all these other places, you know, where people have the substantive knowledge about the stormwater or the schools or whatever it is. I mean, this committee will be too much generalist and it's not the right way. I mean, it'd be open meetings, so it'd be public comment probably, so
Sure.
people could bring anything they wanted to, but that doesn't mean the committee has to take it on or respond to it.
So then that's part of what the charge then is. And
Yeah, that's
what
right,
we're.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the limiting,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, but I think it's good to think about, you know, because that would not be productive.
I think it is good to think about. I think that the real goal in having this was just to, de-escalate the tension around actually looking at it, which seems like that shouldn't be there. There are legitimate reasons for just sitting down and reading the thing from start to end and saying, let's just hang together.
That's the
So-
proactive plan. That's saying,
Correct.
we need to correct some things, probably. We need to consolidate some things, whatever it might be. So that's proactively looking at it. And then we end up reacting to what people come up with or what concerns there are, but we don't want to just react.
Right.
To what we just decided.
Well, so I think what we just decided that in, one of the qualities in crafting a home rule petition needs to sort of set forth the priorities for what this group is looking at. So that people understand that there's not an intent that this group doesn't exist to take over everybody's work. It doesn't exist to make their own judgments on everybody's work, right? It doesn't really, it's just to give it a holistic look. That's the biggest purpose.
When did the warrant close?
Was that?
When does the warrant close?
First Monday in February.
This Tuesday? Yeah, the select board can add after that. We have a placeholder.
Special, you mean, or?
We have a placeholder in there. The warrant doesn't go to print till March. I'm just trying to understand we have a placeholder for a home rule petition, which would amend the charter to have either a bylaw or a charter, or a bylaw and a charter committee, that it would be set in the charter that you would do this review. You could also you could do a bylaw review in the bylaw.
Right.
You don't need a charter for that.
Right.
But if you were going to do charter review, it should be a charter, must be a charter thing.
Right.
So that's kind of a bottom line, get those moving like clear.
And to decide which way to go, if you decided you only wanted to start with bylaws, we can do that in the bylaw, right, Chris? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, why not? Good to take a look.
Would there be agreement, if we said 10 years? Did that feel like a reasonable time? I'm looking to see what are the bylaw,
Yeah, no idea. For bylaw.
for bylaw.
Yeah,
No,
because that
it's
doesn't mean you're
continuous.
not reviewing it in between. That means there's a
There's an
formal
official
review. A
moment in
comprehensive review. Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Moment in time when a group comes together to see whether the bylaws need something, whatever that is.
whatever's been, yeah. It absolutely doesn't mean if somebody needs something in between, that work goes forward. But,
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
I would just offer, I think that there are a lot of volunteer boards who might be mentioned in the bylaw who sort of suffer along with what they've got written. And, you know, if they were invited in to talk, and say, you know, it might be really helpful if this deadline was extended or something, you know, but they just live with it. So I think asking for that board's opinion on their bylaw might be something that they would welcome, that they haven't
Been able
really
to.
taken the time, really, if they're citizen volunteers and they don't need that. Come up.
Sounds as at least for the first review, since it's been in however many years, this is a cumbersome task. So the idea would be start in January and have it for May town meeting?
No, I
No.
think
No,
you
no,
have
no,
to
no.
start.
That's what I'm
no,
asking.
you have to start.
I thought I heard that.
July
Even the year
1.
before.
Okay.
Instead of
I-
beginning of the period so that you knew what was
I
coming.
thought that's what I thought I
Yeah.
heard, so I wanted to clarify. I was like, this is
Yeah, I would envision
great for
that
being ambitious, but.
if you did a bylaw review in the 5, that you would start in the 5, and that doesn't say when you're going to town meeting. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
Okay, okay.
that's what I was
Great.
thinking.
Thank you. Okay.
This is not gonna,
Sorry.
everything takes 18
Yeah,
months out, right? Everything.
But I do think you're right, specifically when you think about committees, I suspect there's more than one committee that would read their section that exists and say, huh, isn't that interesting? So, and we have along the way, we've made changes to future school needs, I mean, so we've done one-offs with
And
things that
transportation.
clearly, people recognized had gotten out of sync with what the needs were. So, all right,
Did I just hear there was general consensus for a 10-year review of the bylaw?
yeah,
10 or-
Yes.
Yeah.
10 years, but on the 5s or something like that,
yeah.
starting on the 5s.
And I think, so when we think about the bylaw, let's think for a moment about committee. Does the bylaw need a group that is substantially larger than this group? This size group? Or would this size group feel okay for bylaw review? I do think charter review is a different discussion. But for bylaw review, I'm wondering if this is reasonable.
With a balance between executive and
Nine.
legislative. So.
We don't have a balance in this room
I know
between
we don't.
executive and legislative.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you need it for a bylaw. I think the bylaw may depend more on expertise and then bringing in individual people for things to consult on. And I guess I'm gonna say, right, there's science that says committee size is larger than 7, you immediately start to sub-optimize, so.
My thought was that the expertise be brought in as needed, but not a hugely large group, representatives.
I mean, I do think if more of a
boards and
charter, we're
committees,
gonna
I
be
think.
talking about working with a larger group, but
Yeah.
my question is bylaws, do we need to do that?
Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, so I think that bylaws that relate to town meeting are very different from the bylaws that relate to town administration and are very different from police powers or licenses and permits. And so if we're going to start trying to change, and I'm just gonna speak to the finance committee, how the finance committee operates, I think that that has to be a different type of a committee because that really affects a major process and a major committee within town. As opposed to, not to having had dogs. Dog regulations may not, you know, have that same level of change to government.
So I guess I was thinking that if we got to the point where we made a decision like that,
Mm-hmm.
it probably, you make that decision in your July timeframe, right? That you're probably gonna need a working group that takes on that work, that can bring back a recommendation, right? That it's not that this group gets expanded, but that you create working groups that can bring, that are appropriate, that can bring back a recommendation to this committee. I guess that's kind of the process I was thinking, if that
Who
makes
sets
sense.
up the appropriate working?
The bylaw committee.
Probably the bylaw committee, yeah.
Well, we could define, collectively, who are the people who we think we need to do that.
I mean, which may include the town moderator or an appointee of the town moderator.
Other staff, right?
FinCom, the school board, depending on what the issue may be.
Right.
And it would have its, and the committee should have its power, the power to be able to do that.
It can be in a working group.
It can be in a working group
Right.
of whoever it thinks is best to study a particular issue.
So now I'm gonna just completely play devil's advocate. Okay, so now you've got some kind of agenda that someone is trying to push. So a working group is set up to make it look like now this was independently studied. I'm just being, completely cynical. But that would be a concern. It's like how some of these legislative processes are substantially different from others. And I'm not sure that the same review process would apply to some as opposed to others. And I know we're meeting over multiple meetings, so we have time to think about it, and I haven't really thought about, how to address that. I do like the idea of a working group gets set up, but how do you decide who that working group is? And that's what I think maybe spend a little time thinking.
Thinking about, okay, so I do think that even this group is
Mhm.
broad enough to protect against your
I
cynical
think this group is,
concern.
yeah.
Right, and I
Yes.
would have thought that this group would need to collectively agree that it is a topic that has reached a level of importance, that it should be studied. And, that we would need to work to get it on a work plan and figure out who can help with that.
And this is a group where decisions move forward by majority, by consensus, by supermajority.
That's a question. When you're talking about, your scenario of fear, right? Right, is your concern that someone, for instance, from the planning, I'll make the planning board the bad guy in this scenario, that there may be a rogue party from the planning board,
No,
or are you thinking a rogue party as a resident of the
Yeah.
town
yes,
who's not a member of this,
right,
that wants to study the issue of the town treasurer and tax collector?
right. Or it's an advocacy group, of which we have many
Many.
in town. And so, they do have a certain amount of sway and pull.
I guess it's not clear to me that bylaw review process is the place for that, right? I really think that comes in to organizations in their routine annual work plan discussions. And they're gonna decide yea or nay. I don't
Okay.
see that as this group, and I think setting up this group to be the place for people to say, I'm just gonna wait for 10 years to pass, and then I'm gonna launch my assault,
Right,
right? I think that would set a dangerous precedent,
yes,
actually.
yes,
So process wise, again, I keep going back, I just want to make sure I really understand. So this group is set up, they're gonna start the review, bring in the various boards, committees for feedback, right, and the changes. But then again, that public process, when those things come in, where do they go? How are these working groups, so they then have the ability to decide whether it's worth it or not, to look at something as a bylaw. And I think that's sort of where my concern was as well. I guess that was a good word for the advocacy group, because I sort of call them friends of, to come in with whatever their projects and thoughts are at the time of that and sort of bypass some of our other avenues.
So here's what I'm gonna observe. I think all of this is really important discussion to think about, is there a way to codify or not? And I have not read these other bylaws to see if they have language that would limit our concern. But
They don't, they're all like two
Okay.
sentences.
But it does seem to me, right, that this group would be a group that understands that the town has finite resources. This is not, cannot turn into a rock fetch, right? Everybody's already got agendas that are set up, right? So I think the question for this group will be, is there some subject that for some reason rises to the level and hasn't been considered somewhere else, that it becomes apparent it needs to be taken on? Otherwise, generally speaking, I think your answer is, it goes back to the regular process.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
This is not a super process to take away from anybody else. That would be what makes sense to me. I don't know how we write that, but I think that's appropriate.
And it can be just in the preamble too.
Yeah,
Not,
just sort of describe
yeah,
that.
Also probably not an appeals board. This is not where you.
Right.
You
No,
didn't get the answer you
You
wanted
didn't get
somewhere
it,
else.
So you're gonna bring it again, right?
I'm sure Donald Trump will be here for that.
I appreciated what you said, Louise, about, you know, trying to change like our institutions versus what fines we
Yeah.
charge. These are very different things. Did you have a sense of who you would think should be on a committee that could do all of those, or is it possible that if you're taking up sections, this and that of the bylaw, you have this kind of committee, you have to add these people? I don't know, is that something that would make sense?
Well, it certainly makes sense. I think that to Louise's question about if you were taking up a portion of our government, right? FinCom, planning board, a key committee of town,
library, I mean,
library, well, it's regulated by the state. There's other issues with that one, right?
Yeah.
But that is going to
council on
need
Aging.
its own sort of special purpose
Right,
group to
Right.
consider it,
exactly.
which
So
is not.
You might
true
say
for
that you
fines.
add these many to the committee or something like that.
Report's a separate working group.
We
Report
talked
doesn't-
about chartering a working group
Yeah.
or something. I don't know.
I don't know, maybe I'm misconceiving this. My thought about this is that this is largely a textual exercise. That this committee is not here to like just brainstorm everything that's wrong with the town and everything.
Right,
Could be
so
done
that's
where
where
Allison
started.
Right,
Yeah.
there's
it's
not
not
that, it's textual, so you're like, okay, let's get out the bylaws, let's read them. Let's consider, do they conflict with each other? Are there things in here that are clearly outmoded, you know, and then along the way, if something is obviously missing as we read it. But I don't know if other people feel that way, but that's what I envisioned this to be, it's all about the text of the bylaws.
So then
And
that.
diving
limits
into
the-
that text, and that is your focus and purpose.
And then change might involve a small group, external.
Sure, you
external
pick it to
committee.
the appropriate
Pick
people that
their
already
ideas, some
exist.
advice
If
on the
something like
language.
that comes up, but you're really like,
I see,
Yeah.
I see that the review happening in that way, and like we talked earlier, there could be a scenario, for instance, where the design review board is frustrated with certain limitations within our sign bylaw. And they may, in an off year or on their own, may make a recommendation for some kind of a separate change. Or it may be, something that has been missed, overlooked, and they may want, this review committee to take a look at it. And they would come in and have a discussion with the committee and say, is there any opportunity to improve this? This is the problem. And, we'd like to identify a new solution. So it may come about, you know, just by every 5 years rereading the bylaws as a group, or it could come about as these other hanger-on that just, items that haven't given rise to immediate action by a separate committee or a separate group already. And that finds its way into here.
But I think when you get into these different categories, though, you also have to take the state laws and the other laws that
Right.
apply to them, and you have to understand that they are there.
Right, for a reason. That's valid, that's right. Like, for instance, the,
Like the dog regulations.
Right, chapter 140.
or the library, you know.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm gonna take your design review board. I don't know enough about how they operate, but if they had something in their bylaws that they want to change, wouldn't they then as a committee?
Yeah.
Work through that and
That's all I
bring
was
that to town
They
meeting? So
should
again,
work through
I-
it.
Yeah.
and then
my
I think
vision
it
is what
goes
I
to
see you're
planning
saying. I'm
board,
just
frankly.
concerned about
They
these-
work with, in conjunction with you, right?
So.
I don't view us as being overall the cutout for that. So.
This, I picked the sign bylaw because I thought it was an interesting example where, yes, the DRB, it comes through the planning board and in part through the select board. But there are separate sign bylaws that the town has promulgated, you know, as a result of this. As a result of our town bylaw.
Mhm.
the general
And those have always been really fun discussions at town meeting.
Yes, probably not gonna change that.
I'm
But
still,
somebody may decide from DRB that something is no longer necessary,
it's.
would be their
outmoded.
recommendation.
Yes,
Or
Right.
some member of the public might say they don't like our rule on sandwich boards.
yes.
I mean, the last time. we
But,
discussed it,
but
it was
that,
like-
I would send back to DRB. They have the
Yeah.
job to make that recommendation.
So it
Right.
sounds like we just need to be clear
On
on
what?
the directive
Yeah.
of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
committee.
Yeah, what it is and what it is not.
Right.
Right.
This
A
group
lot
is
of what it
not
is not.
taking over other boards' work.
Right.
Right.
Right, that I think, yes, what it is not taking over other.
I do think, though, there's an opportunity for a bylaw review committee to come in and read the sign bylaw and say,
Oh,
you know, but boy, this bylaw says there's no neon signs allowed. Why are they everywhere?
Yes.
You know, and then
Or
maybe
to
say
the
to ask
about
DRB.
digital signs, should they exist?
I mean, I'm
you
not
know?
saying they're gonna
Right.
decide it, but they could read it and say, that seems inconsistent,
Right.
and ask someone else to look at it.
The
right?
interesting thing is though, that's actually not part of the planning board's jurisdiction. You know, the sign bylaw exists outside of the planning board. And it's a question of whether or not, you know, the property owner is abiding by, you know, that. So it's not necessarily something that would,
Come to the planning board, but it would go to the design review board.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where enforcement is.
Building.
Oh, he gets all the fun stuff.
Right, I'm gonna do a time check here. It is, 6:28. And I know the intent is for us to be 1 hour and
Yeah,
then
we-
to be cleared
15
before.
minutes max you have.
Right.
We have 15 minutes. We'll be good. I'm good.
So do you want us to try to write something up based on this conversation about the bylaws for your next meeting?
It feels like we
Yeah.
should write something about the
Yeah.
We start with the
bylaws
bylaw and then see
Yeah,
what?
and then see where we go from there.
and then see where we go.
I will be remote like next time. Just so you-
I think I'm remote next time too, so. I think.
I'll be right
It's
here in
full
the
vacation week.
It's the 21st. I believe you're
Oh, I'm
leaving the
back.
21st.
I'm back.
No, it's next.
It's the 21st, right?
I'm leaving on the 22nd. I'm still here, right?
I know your calendar in my head. I was like,
Okay, so that was a really scary conversation. Can you make a comment about it? I did.
I didn't remember what to say.
I just have to call, remind Marianne
Okay,
back on
yes,
the 20th.
Well,
Back on the 20th.
Right.
Okay, so I,
Okay.
yes, I think if we could draft something for bylaws
Yeah.
that feels like the right thing.
Well, you can also put this in the special, just
And then
give us
we
a little
can just-
breathing room to.
Right.
And
So
then we
it
don't
gives us
even,
time to,
But I
Yeah,
think
that would-
doing that will also give us time, now that we've had this conversation, to think about what would that mean for charter.
Yeah,
which could
that would
different. I
be
think
a
it's
lovely
important.
and it could be different.
It
Yeah.
could be different, right?
and I
Yeah.
think the thing to remember about the charter is when you open it up, the legislature gets,
Yeah, they get to look at it
If
too.
they look at
Yeah,
it too.
yeah, it's not,
you know,
yeah,
the
it's
last, we
not-
had written it in 2004 to have language that at the time was inclusive, was he, she.
Mhm,
And the legislature refused and it was all he.
right.
And the last time we
Oh.
updated the charter, I can't remember
It
what
was
it,
for the select board.
For the
and
select board, they
all the
rewrote the
language
charter.
Again.
so I'm agreeing with you that when you open the charter, it has to be very carefully done, but we do it. And, but And
Lovely.
we write it in a
Lovely,
way
spend our
that
time.
it says they can only make certain changes without
But they
approval.
don't, they don't,
Well, they won't do your thing if you
right,
don't say things.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So,
I think it's a good aim for town meeting and then a good aim for charter for special and.
Well, I'm gonna put the bylaw in the bylaws
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
special,
Yeah.
because it just gives us more time.
Got it.
Okay, so you're drafting,
I'll draft something for
Bylaw,
next meeting,
for
for the
bylaw.
bylaws.
and then when we come back together, we can look at that and we can mull over what we talked about today and see if then there's a analog that makes sense for us, but.
because we didn't really talk about composition of that committee yet, but we can talk about it next time then.
Yeah.
We'll throw something out for you to work off of.
But I do think, so I'm going to encourage you in here, when we talk about bylaw, you know, we've sort of talked several times, does it need to be a group larger than this? If you think that it does, that's important information. So be thinking about that so we can have some concrete ideas the next time we come back together that are specific for that.
And there
I
are,
think more than this is big. I
Yeah,
think when it gets too big, it's
I
hard to
agree.
manage.
So you're looking
I
at
think this
seven?
is
This is
a good size, good conversation, not a lot of like.
so.
Seven.
It's just important to have representation though. That's, you know, I
That's-
think, and I think as we think about that, in my mind, a lot of it is, and you guys have raised these issues, but it's legitimacy. You know, it's so that people in the town, you know, not that, this group is not gonna have a final say on anything, right? It's gonna go to town meeting,
Right.
but still. I think that the legitimacy of the group and the, you know, perceived
Broad enough.
representation is important.
And the expertise in understanding town government and how town meeting works, and how boards work. right?
Well, I think that's, yeah. Good, yeah.
all right,
And just to confirm, the next meeting is February 24th.
Mhm.
apparently, yes.
Mary Alice said on the 22nd.
Do you have a charge again?
Having on the 20th.
So that's why we fit it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the charge,
So,
we have very specific charge, the 21st, yeah, thank you, Chris.
But I'm not
I'm
sure
not
that we
gonna
can do this all in 2 meetings.
It was, it was an attempt,
It was a whole, you know,
depends on if you do the charter.
well, it could be that we might be at the point after the meeting, so we'd say, we're good enough, let's go in the bylaws right now, we'll start there, and then you can. We'll carry on, and figure out what we're thinking about, let's see where we are. So meanwhile, I take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in
All
favor,
right, I'm going with Adam and Allison.
all right, we are adjourned.
we do it
Thank you,
alphabetically.
everybody, I appreciate.
See you next
time to
time.
talk about this.
See and see next. Thank you for looking at this. Meetings.
Happy to.
I don't know, what do you have on your agenda tonight?
Oh,
It is, well, first we have budget discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Health and Insurance. It is all the.
And.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Allison.
But I actually was thinking about, what is the public health?
Question on topic.
Did you, Case, but it,
I'll give you 1 second.
yeah, but we know that we.
And then,